In October 2024, restoration workers at the Monastery of San Pedro de Cardena near Burgos, Spain, discovered something that wasn't on any architectural plan. While reinforcing the foundation of the 11th century cloister, a contractor's ground-penetrating radar detected a sealed chamber beneath what had been listed as solid bedrock. The monastery's prior insisted no such space existed in their records. When engineers opened the chamber on October 18, they found a room measuring approximately 4 meters by 6 meters, accessible only through a concealed entrance behind the monastery's wine cellar. Inside, German military documents, Waffen-SS uniforms with rank insignia still attached, forged Spanish identity papers, and a detailed journal written in Gothic German script. The journal belonged to Oberführer Klaus Steiner, Waffen-SS, officially listed as deceased at Nuremberg on October 16, 1946, the day the War Crimes Tribunal executed 10 high-ranking Nazi officials. Except Steiner had never been at Nuremberg. The execution records listed him among condemned prisoners, but no photograph confirmed his presence. No body was ever independently verified as his. For 78 years, historians assumed administrative errors in the chaotic post-war documentation. They were wrong. Stories like this only surface when someone keeps questioning the official narrative. Klaus Steiner was born in 1903 in Heidelberg to a family with deep Catholic roots. His father was a theology professor, his mother from minor Bavarian nobility. Steiner studied law at the University of Munich, joined the Nazi Party in 1931, and entered the SS in 1933. By 1939, he held the rank of Sturmbannführer and commanded an administrative unit responsible for logistics and supply coordination in occupied Poland. His wartime career followed an unusual trajectory for an SS officer. Unlike combat commanders who led frontline units, Steiner specialized in what internal SS documents called special administrative operations. Declassified files from the Nuremberg archives, examined in detail only after 2015, revealed that Steiner's unit managed the liquidation of Jewish property, coordination of forced labor transfers, and documentation of concentration camp supply chains. He wasn't running the camps. He was making them function efficiently. His signature appeared on requisition orders for Zyklon B gas, transport schedules for deportation trains, and financial reports on confiscated assets. The bureaucracy of genocide. By 1944, Steiner had been promoted to Oberführer, equivalent to a senior colonel, and transferred to SS headquarters in Berlin. His new role involved coordinating the evacuation of sensitive documents and assets as Allied forces closed in from both directions. Intelligence reports from British MI6, partially declassified in 2019, noted that Steiner had access to SS financial records, lists of collaborators across Europe, and detailed knowledge of escape networks being prepared for high-ranking officers. In January 1945, as Soviet forces advanced toward Berlin, Steiner received orders to relocate critical files to secure locations in southern Germany and Austria. He organized the transfer of hundreds of crates containing personnel records, financial ledgers, and intelligence reports. Some of these crates were recovered by Allied forces in May 1945. Others were never found. Steiner himself was captured by American troops on May 8, 1945, near Berchtesgaden. His interrogation file, now held at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, shows he was cooperative, providing information about SS administrative structures and document storage locations. He claimed to be a logistics officer with no direct involvement in combat operations or extermination policies. His interrogators noted he was intelligent, evasive, and likely withholding information. He was transferred to Nuremberg in August 1945 as the International Military Tribunal prepared to prosecute major war criminals. Steiner wasn't among the primary defendants like Göring, Hess, or Ribbentrop. He was listed as a potential witness and lower-priority war criminal scheduled for subsequent proceedings. That's where the official story gets complicated. The Nuremberg execution records from October 16, 1946, listed 12 individuals hanged that night. The famous 10 defendants from the main trial, plus 2 additional SS officers from preliminary hearings. One of those 2 was identified as Klaus Steiner, Oberführer, SS Administrative Division. The execution was documented in official logs maintained by the American occupation authorities. Each condemned prisoner was photographed before execution, though several photographs were later lost or damaged. Steiner's photograph was among those missing from the official archive. The executioner's report, signed by Master Sergeant John C. Woods, listed all 12 executions as completed without incident. Bodies were transported to Munich, cremated at Ostfriedhof Cemetery, and ashes scattered in the Isar River to prevent grave sites from becoming Nazi shrines. Standard procedure. No physical evidence remained to verify individual identities. For decades, historians accepted these records at face value. Steiner was executed, cremated, and scattered. Case closed. But the journal found in the Spanish monastery in 2024 told a different story, one that began 6 weeks before the supposed execution. The first entry was dated September 3, 1946, written in Steiner's distinctive handwriting, confirmed through comparison with authenticated SS documents. The arrangement is finalized. Heinrich has confirmed the substitute. American guards are underpaid and demoralized. The Catholic network will provide the next stage. I must survive long enough to deliver what I know. Heinrich referred to Heinrich Müller, chief of the Gestapo, who vanished in May 1945 and was never found. The substitute was never named in the journal, but context suggested a prisoner willing to die in Steiner's place in exchange for something. Money, perhaps, or a promise to support his family. The Catholic network was the key. And that's what led investigators in 2024 to Spain. The monastery of San Pedro de Cardena had a complicated history. Founded in the 10th century, it survived wars, plagues, and political upheavals. During the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, it sheltered refugees from both sides. After World War II, it became part of a quiet network of religious institutions across Europe that provided refuge to displaced persons, war orphans, and others fleeing the chaos of post-war reconstruction. Some of those displaced persons were Nazi war criminals. The network, never officially acknowledged by the Catholic Church but documented through fragmentary evidence in declassified intelligence files, operated through sympathetic clergy who viewed communism as a greater threat than fascism. They saw certain German officers, particularly those who claimed to be anti-communist, as potential allies in the emerging Cold War. They helped them obtain forged documents, transit through secure routes, and resettle in South America, the Middle East, or Spain. This network is often referred to as Ratlines, though that term oversimplifies a complex web of individual actions, institutional decisions, and geopolitical calculations. Not all clergy participated. Not all who helped were motivated by Nazi sympathy. Some genuinely believed they were saving souls. Others were more pragmatic. San Pedro de Cardena was one node in this network, though its role had never been definitively proven until the 2024 discovery. The journal described Steiner's journey in careful detail. On September 5, 1946, 11 days before his supposed execution, he was transferred from Nuremberg prison to a supposed medical facility for treatment of a stomach ailment. The transfer was authorized by an American administrative officer whose signature appeared on the paperwork, but whose name investigators in 2024 couldn't verify in personnel records. Steiner never reached the medical facility. Instead, the transport vehicle, driven by a German auxiliary working for the American occupation forces, deviated from its route and delivered him to a safe house near Stuttgart. He remained there for 3 days while arrangements were finalized. On September 8, he was given civilian clothes, a forged identity card in the name of Karl Steinmann, a supposed Austrian refugee, and instructions to travel south toward the Swiss border. He crossed into Switzerland on September 10 using documents that identified him as a Catholic aid worker relocating war orphans. Swiss border records from 1946, examined by researchers in 2024, show an entry for Karl Steinmann on that date. The border guard noted Catholic relief credentials, Vienna Diocese. No secondary inspection was conducted. Switzerland processed thousands of refugees daily in that period. One more Austrian aid worker raised no suspicion. Steiner spent 2 weeks in Switzerland, staying at a religious guest house in Freiburg. The journal described his psychological state during this period: relieved to be free, anxious about pursuit, uncertain about the future. He wrote, "I am alive, but I am also dead. The man I was no longer exists. I must become someone else entirely." From Switzerland, the network arranged his transit to Spain. He traveled by train through France using a different set of forged papers, this time identifying him as a French-Spanish translator working for a Catholic relief organization. He crossed into Spain on October 2, 1946, 2 weeks before the Nuremberg execution he was supposedly part of. The journal entry for October 16th, the day of the executions, was brief but telling: "They hanged him today. Poor soul. I will pray for him, though I doubt God hears prayers from men like me." Steiner had escaped. Someone else had died in his place. And the American occupation authorities either didn't notice or didn't care. Steiner arrived at San Pedro de Cardena on October 20th, 1946. The monastery's prior, Father Tomás Rodriguez, was part of the network. The journal described their first meeting: "Father Tomás is a practical man. He asked few questions about my past. He understands the world is complicated. He said I could stay as long as necessary, but I must be discreet and useful." Useful meant working. Steiner couldn't live as a guest indefinitely without raising suspicion among the other monks. He was assigned work in the monastery's library, cataloging manuscripts and assisting with administrative tasks. His fluency in Latin, German, French, and Spanish made him valuable. To the other residents, he was simply Brother Karl, a refugee from Austria with a sad past he preferred not to discuss. The sealed chamber beneath the cloister was constructed in early 1947. The journal described Steiner's paranoia: "I cannot shake the feeling that they will come. The Americans, the British, the Soviets, someone will eventually piece together what happened. I need a place to hide if they search the monastery." With Father Tomás's permission, Steiner hired local laborers to excavate beneath the wine cellar, telling them he was creating additional storage for valuable manuscripts. The work took 6 weeks. The chamber was lined with brick, fitted with a concealed entrance, and stocked with supplies: food, water, medical items, and most importantly, documents. Steiner had brought materials with him from Germany. The journal referenced insurance multiple times, documents and information he could use to bargain if captured. The chamber held copies of SS financial records, lists of collaborators in Spain and South America, and detailed accounts of assets hidden across Europe. These were the records Allied investigators had been searching for since 1945. Why didn't Steiner turn them over or destroy them? The journal suggested he viewed them as leverage. If threatened, he could offer information in exchange for immunity or safe passage. If left alone, the documents were his guarantee that powerful people had incentive to ensure his silence remained permanent. Life at the monastery followed a predictable routine. Steiner attended services, worked in the library, and maintained the persona of Brother Karl. The journal entries from 1947 through 1950 showed a man trying to reconcile his past with his present. He wrote extensively about guilt, faith, and the nature of forgiveness. Some entries read like confessions. "I signed the orders. I knew where the trains were going. I told myself I was simply doing my job, maintaining efficiency, following procedures. But efficiency in service of evil is still evil. Can God forgive what I cannot forgive in myself?" Other entries were more pragmatic, focused on survival. Father Tomás received word that 2 former SS officers were arrested in Madrid last month. "The net is still active. I must remain invisible." The monastery provided perfect cover. Spain under Franco was sympathetic to anti-communist refugees. The regime didn't cooperate enthusiastically with Allied war crime investigations. As long as Steiner remained quiet and useful, he was safe. The journal showed that Steiner maintained contact with other members of the escape network through coded letters sent via the monastery's regular correspondence. He received occasional updates about former colleagues. Some had successfully reached South America. Others had been captured. A few had died by suicide. One entry from March 1948 was particularly revealing. Received word that Heinrich is alive and in South America. He made it. If he can disappear completely, perhaps I can too. But I am not ready to leave this place. There is a strange comfort in this half-life between penance and hiding. Heinrich Müller, the Gestapo chief, had been one of the most wanted Nazi fugitives. If he had indeed reached South America, it suggested the Ratlines were more effective than Allied intelligence had realized. Steiner's confirmation of Müller's survival, documented in 1948, predated any official intelligence reports on the subject. By 1950, Steiner's entries became less frequent. The journal showed he had settled into monastery life, perhaps accepting that this was his permanent fate. He wrote about translating medieval manuscripts, repairing old books, and the quiet rhythms of religious routine. He attended confession regularly, though he never revealed his true identity to the priest. He wrote, "I confess my sins in general terms. The priest offers absolution. I accept it without believing I deserve it." In 1952, Father Tomas died. The new prior, Father Miguel, knew nothing of Steiner's past. To him, Brother Karl was simply an elderly refugee who'd found peace at the monastery. The secret was safe as long as Steiner remained silent. The journal entries after 1952 showed increasing reflection on mortality. Steiner was nearing 50, suffering from health problems, and contemplating what would happen when he died. Would his true identity be discovered? Would the documents in the hidden chamber ever come to light? He wrote, "Perhaps it is better if the truth dies with me. Let Brother Karl be buried in the monastery cemetery. Let Klaus Steiner remain hanged at Nuremberg. The world has moved on." The final dated entry was December 24, 1957, Christmas Eve. 12 years since the war ended. I have lived longer as Brother Karl than I did as Oberführer Steiner. Which life was real? I no longer know. Tonight, I will attend midnight mass and pray for the souls of those I helped destroy. It is the least I can do. It is all I can do. After that, the journal contained only blank pages. The 2024 investigation team faced a critical question. What happened to Klaus Steiner after 1957? Monastery records showed that Brother Karl Steinmann continued living at San Pedro de Cardena through the 1960s. He worked in the library, attended services, and gradually became frielier as age and illness took their toll. He died on March 14, 1969, officially from heart failure, at the age of 66. He was buried in the monastery cemetery under a simple stone marker reading, Karl Steinmann, 1903 to 1969, requiescat in pace. DNA analysis wasn't possible. The body had been buried for 55 years, and Spanish regulations made exhumation difficult without extraordinary justification. But handwriting analysis of the journal, comparison with authenticated Steiner documents, and cross-referencing of historical details confirmed the journal's authenticity. The man buried as Brother Karl was almost certainly Klaus Steiner. He had lived 23 years after his supposed execution. He'd spent those years in a monastery, hidden in plain sight, maintaining a false identity while sitting on documents that could have answered questions Allied investigators had been asking for decades. The documents themselves were examined by an international team of historians and forensic archivists. They confirmed Steiner's claims. The papers included Financial records showing deposits in Swiss banks made by SS officers between 1943 and 1945. Lists of Spanish and South American citizens who had collaborated with German intelligence. Detailed accounting of assets looted from Jewish victims and their eventual distribution. Names and locations of SS officers who had successfully escaped through the Ratlines. The information was historically significant but legally problematic. Most of the individuals named were dead. The few still alive were elderly, and prosecuting them presented complex jurisdictional and evidentiary challenges. The Swiss bank accounts had been closed or absorbed into successor institutions decades ago. The collaborator lists named people whose families still lived in Spain and Argentina. The Spanish government, after consulting with legal experts and historians, decided to make the documents public but redact certain identifying details to protect descendants who bore no responsibility for their ancestors' actions. The full archive is now held at the Spanish National Archive in Madrid, accessible to researchers with appropriate clearances. The substitute who died in Steiner's place at Nuremberg was never definitively identified. Researchers examined execution records, prisoner transfer logs, and photographic evidence, but found no conclusive proof of who the man was. The most likely theory, based on fragmentary evidence, suggests he was a German prisoner of war who had been convicted of lesser crimes and faced execution anyway. He may have been offered money for his family or simply chosen death on his own terms rather than waiting for a scheduled execution. The American officer who authorized Steiner's transfer was also never identified. The signature on the transfer documents didn't match any known personnel files. It may have been forged, or it may have belonged to someone who was later transferred out of Germany and disappeared into post-war bureaucracy. Without a name, investigators couldn't pursue that lead further. Father Tomás Rodríguez's role was confirmed through monastery archives examined after the discovery. Internal records showed he had been part of a network of Spanish clergy who assisted refugees after World War II. His personal papers, preserved in the monastery library, included correspondence with other religious institutions across Europe, some using coded language that suggested coordination of refugee movements. He died in 1952, long before any of this came to light. The monastery itself faced difficult questions after the discovery. The current prior, Father Javier, issued a statement acknowledging that the institution had unknowingly harbored a war criminal, but emphasizing that current leadership bore no responsibility for actions taken 78 years ago. He noted, "We cannot change the past, but we can ensure that history is told honestly. This chamber and its contents are part of a dark chapter that must be remembered, not hidden." The chamber has been preserved as a historical site. Researchers can access it by appointment, though it's not open to general public tours. The Spanish government has designated it a protected historical location, ensuring it won't be destroyed or altered. The broader implications of Steiner's case extend beyond one individual's escape. His journal and documents confirmed what historians had long suspected but couldn't definitively prove. The Ratlines were more extensive and more effective than official records suggested. Religious institutions, sympathetic officials, and Cold War priorities combined to help hundreds, possibly thousands, of Nazi war criminals escape justice. How many others like Steiner lived quiet lives under assumed names, dying peacefully while their victims' families searched for answers? The journal mentioned other SS officers by nickname or code name, but most couldn't be identified from available records. Some may still be alive, now over 100 years old, living in South America, Spain, or elsewhere under identities created in the 1940s. The execution records from Nuremberg have been re-examined in light of Steiner's case. Historians are now questioning whether other executions might have been similarly falsified. The photographic evidence for several condemned prisoners is incomplete or missing. Body verification was often perfunctory. The possibility that others escaped using similar methods can't be ruled out. Dr. Elena Martinez, the lead historian on the 2024 investigation, noted in her preliminary report, "The Steiner case demonstrates how administrative chaos, deliberate deception, and institutional complicity combined to undermine justice. We must consider that official records from this period are not always reliable. The truth is messier and more disturbing than we'd like to believe. What kind of man was Klaus Steiner? The journal provides a complex portrait. He was intelligent, calculating, and fully aware of his moral culpability. He expressed guilt but also rationalized his actions. He sought religious comfort but didn't truly believe he deserved forgiveness. He lived in fear of discovery but also in a strange state of resignation. Was his monastery life a form of penance? Or was it simply pragmatic hiding? The journal suggests both. He chose to live quietly rather than flee to South America because the monastery offered psychological refuge as well as physical safety. He could pretend to be someone else, attend Mass, perform good works, and perhaps convince himself that his present life balanced his past actions. It didn't. The scales of justice don't balance that way. Cataloging manuscripts doesn't undo signing deportation orders. Attending confession doesn't resurrect murdered victims. Steiner understood this intellectually, but emotionally, he needed the structure of religious routine to survive psychologically. The families of his victims, those who could be identified from his records, were notified of the discovery. Most had long accepted that their relatives' killers were dead or beyond reach. Some expressed anger that Steiner had lived comfortably while their families suffered. Others expressed a kind of hollow satisfaction that the truth had finally emerged, even if too late for any practical justice. One descendant, the grandson of a Polish Jewish family deported on train Steiner had scheduled, traveled to Spain in November 2024 to see the chamber. He told reporters, "My grandmother died at Auschwitz on a train that this man made run on time. He treated genocide like a logistics problem. And then he lived 23 more years praying in a monastery. There's no justice in that. There's only documentation." The chamber beneath San Pedro de Cardena stands as a monument to a particular kind of historical failure. Not the failure to capture one war criminal, but the systemic failure that allowed hundreds to escape, the institutional complicity that provided them refuge, and the Cold War priorities that made pursuing them less important than other geopolitical goals. Steiner wasn't the worst of the Nazi war criminals. He didn't personally operate gas chambers or command death squads. But he made the machinery of genocide function efficiently. He reduced human destruction to administrative procedure. And when that machinery collapsed, he transformed himself into someone else and walked away. The documents he preserved might help answer some historical questions. They might provide closure for some families. But they also raise new questions about how many other sealed chambers, hidden archives, and false graves exist across Europe and South America. How many other Brother Karls lived out their lives in quiet anonymity while history recorded them as dead? The war ended 79 years ago. But its final accounting is still incomplete. Every discovery like this one rewrites another footnote, corrects another error, reveals another truth that was carefully buried. The work of uncovering these stories continues, one sealed chamber at a time, because the alternative is letting the lies become permanent. Klaus Steiner died in 1969, believing his secret would die with him. He was wrong. The monastery kept its records. The chamber kept its documents. And 55 years after his death, the truth emerged, exactly as he had feared and exactly as he deserved. The stone marker over his grave still reads, Karl Steinmann. The monastery has added a small plaque explaining the historical significance of the burial site. Visitors can see where an SS colonel lived as a monk and died with a false name. The truth came eventually, too late for justice, but not too late for history.